Night School.
Nice, cool.
Night School. Today, I'm not going to be talking about a nonfiction book. We don't usually do this, but I'm going to talk about a couple of different fiction books, both along the same lines. 1984 and Brave New World. 1984 is by George Orwell, and Brave New World is by Aldous Huxley. I've never read books by either of these guys, but they're very big authors, and these, I feel like, are the two biggest books in like the dystopian genre. They're like the two biggest depictions of dystopia that you hear referenced a lot.
Right.
And I never got like exposed to these in school or anything. I never was like assigned to do them or anything, which it feels like a lot of people do. So these were both kind of books that were on that long list of like fiction that seems like sort of essential reading for everybody. And I'm glad I was able to get to them because they were both very good books. And I want to talk about both of them. I want to compare the worlds that are depicted and kind of discuss what is the most likely of these things to happen. Because both of these books are set in a hypothetical future where things have gone very wrong and there is a totalitarian government. But totalitarian governments with very different strategies and different routes that they took to get to the point where they had the complete power that they have. So yeah, I want to talk about those two books.
I'm curious, what year were they written? Were they written in near similar time?
George Orwell wrote Brave New World was written first. This was written in, I think it was 39. No, earlier. I think it was like 34 or something like that. And then 1984 was written in 1949. Or it was a 13-year 12 or 13-year difference. So 36, 37, something like that. So 1984 was very much written with knowledge of Brave New World. And Brave New World and Aldous Huxley got a copy of 1984. George Orwell made sure that Aldous Huxley got a copy of it when it came out. And Aldous Huxley did comment on it and like wrote an open letter to him, which I am going to read later because I thought it was so interesting. Like Aldous Huxley has opinions on comparisons between the two of them.
Right.
And that's very fun.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So these two worlds, I would say that 1984 broadly is a world where it's a world constantly at war. The whole world is divvied up into 3 countries, and these countries are always at war. They are called Oceania. The main character, like all the characters that are explored in this, are from Oceania. We don't actually see any insight into the other 2 countries, Eurasia and Eastasia. So they're like super continent kind of countries. We've all just formed into 3 of them. And everybody in the world, everybody in Oceania is always told by the government who they're at war with, and the government will just sort of like randomly switch back and forth between like what the story even is as to who they're actually at war with. So the whole war may even be fictional, but everybody lives as though they are currently at war and they owe it to their country to contribute as much as they can to the country. And they're driven by hate of the enemies, hate of whoever the enemy is officially at the time. The Brave New World is a much happier place. There's no war. There's only one government. There is the one world party.
The way it ought to be.
For sure, yeah. There's the world state. That's what they call it. There's the world state, and they run everything. And everything is peaceful, and everything is extremely sanitary. And whereas 1984 feels like it comes out of a Nazi Germany esque situation that got bigger and bigger. Like it feels like the Nazis took over the world. The Brave New World feels like technology and progress have just taken over the world. So it's a world where nobody has children. Everything is just like test tubes, and everybody is just sort of, it's very like a beehive. Like it feels like they just barely consider themselves. They just sort of consider themselves a part of this whole, and they don't want to have any they don't want to have any thoughts or ideas that deviate, that like would separate them from the rest of the group, because it's happier to be with them. So Brave New World is very happy, and the 1984 world is very fearful and hate based. But everybody is kept in line in those different ways. I've got some notes here. I'm just going to go through different aspects of the world and how it functions in each of them. The leader in 1984's Oceania is a character called Big Brother. There's so many like little like words that have become part of the zeitgeist to us now that like originate from 1984. Big Brother, Newspeak, Thought Crime, the Thought Police. Like
Thought Police is huge.
Yeah,
you hear that term a lot.
Yeah, like all those things have like sort of become a part of terminology now. But Big Brother is a character who like may not even exist. He's just in billboards. He's sounds like a very, do you know Tom Selleck? He's a very handsome man with dark hair and a mustache who's about 45. And nobody ever like sees him or like actually hears him talk, but they just see the billboards and they all completely believe that this leader exists. When he may or may not. It may just be that there's like just a group of people that he may or may not have ever. He may be old now, or he may be just something that was made up entirely by some group to make it seem like there was a strong man at the helm.
But they do see images of him.
They see photos of him. Yeah, like
but they never see broadcasts from him or anything.
Right. They never actually see anything like that. The leader, there is no real leader of the Brave New World. There are sort of regional controllers, and it seems like there's like 10-ish of it seemed like there'd be like 10 leaders of different regions of the world, but generally they don't consider anyone the leader. We all serve each other. We all belong to each other. We're all just part of this group. So they have less need of a leader because they all want to contribute to it. There's no one that needs to be like holding a whip to keep them in line.
Yeah.
Because they're happy and they're enjoying this. The enemies in 1984 I mentioned, like the enemies that are presented to the people are Eurasia and Eastasia. And these may or may not exist. It may all just be one country at this point, and the war is a fictional thing just to keep people in line. Because they will say we're at war with Eastasia, and there'll be these propagandistic broadcasts on screens that are everywhere that everybody has to listen to, where they'll tell how the war with Eastasia is going, and it's always going great. It's always good news. It's always better than we thought we would do. And if they didn't do better than they thought that they would do, then they will just go back and change what they said they were going to do, and you will accept that that's what you always said. Because
so even if they're making up the war in general, it still benefits them to make a projection, then come out and change history and pretend they made a different projection, because it still just gets people used to just going with the flow rather than questioning things. Yes,
I should. I'm going to go over the mottos of the two countries, or the two worlds, because I think that'll help paint this a little bit better. The motto of the Brave New World is community, identity, stability. It is sort of like it's a positive thing. The motto of 1984's world is war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Now, these are all like opposites, and it doesn't make sense that this would be the case. And the whole point of this is that you need to accept this motto because it shows that you are more willing to accept what we say than to think about whether it makes any sense at all. So this is a double think. That's another term that like is pretty popularly used from here. Double think, meaning I want you to, like, even though you know that this is false, I want you to know that it's true. Like, I want you to say this and know that this is the truth. This is something that's very similar to what's going on with the Uyghurs. We discussed them in the episode The Perfect Police State. And China's CCP is taking a lot of pages out of the book of 1984, including asking people to say, like, this is blue and it's red. Like, just getting
they're
them.
doing that?
Yeah, to, like, get them to
Interesting.
say something that is factually untrue.
Right.
Because you need to trust the party more than you trust your senses.
And they end up probably justifying it to themselves by reasoning that the truth is so counterintuitive to the average person, and the average person is so incapable of comprehending truth that without that guiding force, without the government to establish truth, everybody would be lost anyway.
Yeah, which I guess fits in with ignorance is strength, part of the
Right.
motto there. If it's good of you to not know all of this.
Right.
Uh,
A lot. It seems like a lot of organized religion ends up doing that, probably not intentionally, but imagine somebody saying, "Yeah, I go to church, and what they say doesn't make sense, but the truth is so counterintuitive that I need the church to lead me and tell me what truth is." Like, that's not that abnormal.
right. Yeah,
Thing to
it's
think.
kind of faith. There needs to be a certain amount of, like, you don't
Right.
know in order for it to mean anything that you accept it.
And I think it's more like let's say there's something in your life that you know is bad for you,
Mm-hmm.
but then later you justify it and reason that maybe it's not bad for you, but you have to have faith that the part of you that concluded that activity is bad for you was right. So faith is just the thing that fills in the gaps. Like,
Yeah.
when you don't have immediate proof of something, are you able to remember that truth is stable enough that that thing you knew that was true
Oh yeah,
yesterday still is?
Yeah.
So it just fills in the gap. Like, that's the story of the 40 days in the desert, 40 years in the desert, I think was the story. It was like
I think it's 40 days.
between
Yeah.
between stability and stability, when we're in the desert, we have to still believe. Like, we still have to have the same
Oh yeah. I see what
view.
you're saying.
So, like, I think that's one example of what faith really is. But to hear a religious person, I think of any religion that pops into my mind: Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. For somebody to say, I have to go to get the source from a teacher because the truth can be so counterintuitive that I can't reason it for myself. I need somebody to lead me and tell me, because I'm a sheep that needs a shepherd. Like, applying that reasoning to organized ideological systems seems pretty normal.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. And it seems to work in the book, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to go back to the point I was making about the projections, the main character of 1984 is a dude named Winston, and Winston is a member of what's called the outer party. So the structure of the society, there is the inner party. They're like the upper echelon of people. They're 2%, and they're the very rich that get nice things. Like, they get real wine, which is like something that the rest of the world is like not even familiar with. That's like mythological, something from the old world.
The old world, is that a term in the book?
No.
Okay.
Although it hasn't been in. So 1984 is set in the year 1984, and it's been like 30 years since this government has taken over.
Okay.
So it's not that distant. Like, Winston has vague memories of being a kid in a world before the war started. So there is the inner party, and then there's the outer party, which makes up about 15% of the group, and that's where Winston fits in. And the outer party is not like a glamorous place to be at all. Like, it sounds like basically being a peasant. You don't get much at all. Everybody has jobs, and his job is that he works for, I believe it's the Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of Truth is the news reporting. So what he does is he gets sent news articles that have errors in them. Now, these news articles may be something like 2 weeks ago, this news article was released, and it says that the government projects that we're going to have 50% better production than the last quarter. Now, that didn't happen, and production was only 10% better. So then Winston's job, he gets this article, and he rewrites the article, corrects the errors that are in this article. They're not errors. Like, that was really what they projected. But when he gets it, and the way he's correctly supposed to think about it is, this has errors in it. I need to fix this so that it correctly shows how well the party is doing and how correctly they predicted how well they were going to be doing. So he goes back and he edits history for people, for the party. And as he's doing that, he starts like thinking for himself more. But that's what I say when I'm talking about the war and how they give projections. They just lie and say, that's what I projected. And everybody says, yes, it is. Like they could say, I project that I will do 10% better. Actually, I did 5% better. But that's great because I said I would do 2% better. Like they could just do it right in a row like that, and everyone would be like, "Yeah, we did 5% better. This is great!" Like, and they really seem to believe it. Like
right.
they seem to believe it at least. And then the other enemy that Oceania.
That statement was interesting. They seem to believe it. There isn't really a such thing as belief being rooted in truth anyway. So it's like, believe what? We speak what we speak. Like, they're the standard for truth. There's not really even a such thing as believing something or not believing something in that world, is there?
I think there is, because Winston doesn't believe it. But it's just hard to say how many people are having thoughts or how many people are like, because Winston, for the most part, he goes along with the bits and he does the stuff he's supposed to do. Because if you seem like you are not, for example, they do this thing every day called the 2 minutes hate. And what they do is everybody at this certain time gets to a telescreen and they show on the screen things that you hate. Like the enemies, the Eurasians or the East Asians, whoever is the enemy right now. And they'll show just like a bunch of images of them doing like bad stuff. And then everybody will be like, it describes like everybody's like screaming. Everybody's like, ah, fuck you, and like just like saying slurs and stuff, like just screaming, and they're all like red in the face, full of hate, screaming, and everybody does that together every day. They do the 2 minutes hate together.
That's hilarious.
And Winston screams along with them too. So
gotcha.
Winston doesn't believe it, but he does it anyway, and that's kind of enough. And it may be that is what almost everybody is doing, that nobody really believes it, but they're all just doing it because it's torture. Like you get tortured if you are shown to be committing a thought crime. And thought crime basically means think. Like if you're thinking about if you're doubting anything that's being told to you, you're a thought criminal. And what's also wild is that for most people, if they get called a thought criminal, they act appreciative of the fact that they were caught and that they can now be corrected because they didn't even know they were doing it. Like, they're just so indoctrinated that even if they're said that they're doing a thought crime, they're like, you're right, I am doing a thought crime. I am so sorry. Like, I can't believe I let myself get this bad.
Okay, cool. Interesting.
The other enemy, and who is also shown a lot in the 2 minutes hate videos, is a guy named Goldstein, which is a very Jewish name. But Goldstein allegedly runs this group that was, what was it? It was like the rebellion. Like, there's this guy Goldstein that seems to be running like a rebellion and to be gathering people that are capable of thinking and want to be down with the party.
Fuck you.
And so everybody hates Goldstein. Yeah, those are the enemies. And it's unclear if any of them exist at all. It's even unclear if Goldstein exists or ever existed. At one point, Winston ends up with like a book that was allegedly written by Goldstein, and he reads the whole thing, and it shows most of the book in the book about what Goldstein had to say about the truth about the party. And what's crazy is how it all seems like written as though it was written by a real rebellion leader. Like, it seems cohesive and like correct and like not something, it's not propaganda. It's like, it really is going hard at the party. But then it turns out that it doesn't seem like Goldstein ever existed, and it's hard to say whether they just made up that enemy or whether he was someone who did have a rebellion once, and now he's just a story to bait out people that are starting to think, to trying to pop their heads up a little bit, and then they can find
Yeah.
out who's thinking, whoever's seeking out Goldstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the majority of people, it's like you sound like Goldstein. We've already established that that's not a good thing. And then for the rare people that do actually get into Goldstein, they start chasing that, and that's a trap.
Right. Because you end up with one of the thought police. And, like, he ends up meeting a couple of people that seem to be sane, but then, like, in the end, he just gets surprised that, like, oh, they were thought police. Like, there's just thought police all over the place.
Oh, and they're undercover?
Yeah, everybody's just undercover thought police. And, like, many of them are pretending, like, you think the way I think. Like, you also have problems with the party. But, like, they're the thought police. Like, they seem to be baiting people out, but they're still the thought police.
Wow.
So,
because the government is so wealthy, because people are taxed so much and they have so little because they're at war,
right,
that they can afford to just hire 10% of the population to police the other 90.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. The Brave New World basically has no enemies. The only enemies are ideological, any sort of like individualistic thinking, any sort of thinking about anything but the group. There are a few people that seem to be that start having thoughts, although it's not as terrifying as a thing in the context of the Brave New World, because it's not torture until you get in line that happens if you get caught having thoughts, or if you are not being it's like if you're not being a good member of the group is like what it is. If you're acting weird and you're just like not really fitting in, then they can end up exiling you. But the exile is just exile to islands like Iceland and Greenland, and there was a couple others that were mentioned, but like pick an island, we'll send you to an island and you can just go live there. So it's a much nicer system that they have if you do have some sort of thinking going on.
So it's more like in Brave New World, if you tell the truth, nobody gives a shit. And in 1984, and when I say nobody gives a shit, I don't just mean they have grace for you even though you're breaking the rules. I mean, they don't really care to hear the truth. So it's like, well, who are you going to tell the truth to?
Right.
Nobody cares.
They kind of treat you like a crazy person, like a babbling madman.
Right.
Like, and he's not, there's something wrong with that guy. Something's not right there. He's not doing what the rest of us are doing.
Right.
Yeah.
So in Brave New World, the truth just falls on deaf, sedated ears, but in 1984 it's met with hostility.
Yeah, like it's a dangerous, crazy thing to say anything but the party line. Like that's like run away from that person, you could go to jail. You could get killed for just being near a thought.
Right.
But in Brave New World, it's like, hey, shut the fuck up with your thinking. Like that's just what it is. Get out of here,
dude. You are killing my high with all that nonsense.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're all on these pills, right?
Yeah. So drugs in these worlds. In 1984, there is very little because they have very little generally. There is reference to like really shit gin that they drink. That Winston will drink this gin and it like makes this spot on his leg hurt really bad every time he does it, but he just drinks it anyway because he's so goddamn miserable living in this world. And then in the Brave New World, everybody has this drug called Soma, which is a name that's taken from like biblical times or something like that. It's a very old word. Brian Mururescu used it a lot in his recent book about do you remember where he was talking about the secret origins of psychedelics? He interviewed Graham Hancock and was on Rogan.
The Immortality Key, the secret history of the religion with no name.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Brian
I didn't know the
Mururescu's
author of
book.
that.
Yeah.
Brian
Mururescu.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the name of the drug that he talks about in that is Soma. And so he uses the word, Huxley's using an old word for some sort of drug. But Soma is like a happy drug, but it seems like it's also a little bit psychedelic. And basically, if anybody starts feeling any sort of negativity, any sort of bad thoughts, sadness, fear, discomfort, they just get high. Like they just take Soma. And the main character, Bernard, in the Brave New World, he starts getting very like frustrated with the Soma to the point where sometimes people will tell him like, everybody has these rhymes that they repeat. They're like just things that they've heard a bunch of times like in their sleep since they were little. But like half a gram is better than a dam. Like they're just all these funny little things that they say.
Pop a pill to get rid of that pesky free will.
Was and will make me ill. I take a gram and only am. That's like one of the things that they end up saying.
That's really well written because
I loved it.
It sounds like it's written by a Snorlax. Like it's just so dead inside and goofy and playful and childlike and soulless. Can you read it again?
Yeah. Was and will make me ill, which I think is really interesting because that's like future and past and future make me sick.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like the sort of enlightening idea of like you need to be present in this moment and not be thinking about the past and not be thinking about the future. But it's used in this way that's like supposed to just separate you from thought for the purposes of the government. But was and will make me ill. I take a gram and only am.
Interesting.
Which is very like be here now. Like,
right.
Yeah. But there's lots of those little rhymes that people say. People in this world get indoctrinated from a young age, and they get lines repeated over loudspeakers so that they hear them in their sleep, and these words get very much like ingrained into them to the point where they spout them off whenever like the proper moment, whenever the situation comes up where like you're starting to feel sad, like there's just, you can't help but like say some rhyme that you've heard a million times. Bernard works for I can't remember what the department is, but they do hypnopedic. What's that? How do you pronounce that letter that's A and E?
No idea. I think Damon, so I think A.
Okay. So he does hypnopedic. It's brainwashing. Like he writes the stuff that they get repeated, and he tweaks like how often, like how many repetitions of each at which point. And like he does this thing when like whenever somebody says one of those lines, he'll then say something like 100 repetitions every day from 15 to 17. Like he knows exactly how many times that person has heard that line and when, because he's like works in that department where they tweak how much of which message they pump into people's heads. Yeah. But yeah, they all do this drug. They do it all the time, and he starts getting frustrated with it because, as he expresses, he would rather be mad than feel nothing. He would just rather be angry right now at the situation than be sated by the drug that'll just make him not feel anything.
Right.
And they'll like space out. Like there's a character named Lenina who is very much like not thinking, very much on the party line. And she'll end up getting frustrated with something and then go like she'll say like a 12-hour vacation where she's just like zonked out on the bed, passed out, and says she's on the moon or something like that. Like it sounds psychedelic in a lot of cases.
So can you take as much of it as you want?
Everybody is carrying it with them, and they get half-gram tablets, and I think the most I've heard someone take is 6 of those half-gram tablets, but you take it yourself. So, and it could be that you can OD on it. That's not really mentioned. It doesn't seem like anybody would want to kill themselves because they just take more drugs.
They're just chilling.
They're just doing this.
Yeah.
And then there is a little bit of alcohol that's mentioned in the Brave New World as well. In the civilized world, alcohol is considered like an unhealthy and bad thing to do. Nobody drinks alcohol in the civilized world. But there's the islands, which are like the exile islands that people get sent to if they're thinking too much. So they just are left to do their own thing on the islands, whatever happens, but they just need to stay there. They're exiled. And then there are also reservations within like the civilized world, which are very similar to like our native reservations. but it seems like different cultures live there. Because this now, as of the story, the world seems like it's been running like 300 years like that. Like it's been a long time since the before this. I lost it. What was I going to say? Right before 300 years.
Alcohol, reservations, islands.
Reservations, yeah. So it's not just like Native Americans that are there, but there's just all kinds of different racial groups that are in those reservations. But these reservations, they're allowed to do their own thing in them, but party members can visit them. So it's kind of like a vacation spot for people to go. And so these people will go visit the reservation and just sort of be like, oh, look at this strange culture. And they'd see things like parenthood, which parenthood is like a bizarre and like a gross thing to do in this world. Everybody is raised in pods. There's no mothers and fathers. Everybody is just genetically selected. There's all these, it goes into like a lot of weird technologies that they've developed. Like they're able to split fertilized eggs up to like 86 times. So they'll have like batches of identical twins, like 86 of them that will come out, and they'll all be like trained to do the same job or whatever. And so it goes into a lot of like the different technologies that they developed over time. And it seems like this is pretty crucial to like what the point is. Like they're trying to progress and they're trying to make people better over time. And they found that doing it through the old-fashioned way was inefficient and messy and is not going to get ideal people, because we can trim out DNA from certain like bad traits or whatever. So over time, people should be getting better and better. But the idea of parenthood, like saying, if I asked you like, who's your mother? It's like a fart joke is how it's depicted. Like it's like scatological kind of humor. It's like someone entertains saying that at some point. And it's like, no, that'd be gross. Like it's just such a bizarre concept to them.
Okay.
But then, yeah, so they'll go to the reservations to see like how humans used to live, basically. And most of the people are unable to have kids. They're either like on contraceptive, they're either like taking birth control pills, or have been like chemically altered so that they just are sterile anyway. But there's one of the main characters of the story is a guy named John, who was raised at the reservation because his mother was accidentally left there. His mother was a party member. His mother accidentally got pregnant and just hadn't had a chance to get an abortion yet, and got accidentally left at the reservation, and her son grew up there. And so this character, John, the savage, as he's usually referred, ends up being kind of like the lens. He's like the audience surrogate in the story a little bit, because he's seeing the world through these fresh eyes as an adult, as he's been raised on the reservation in a pretty natural setting his whole life. And then he comes to this world and
so John had a mom, because they ended up living on the reservation together, right?
Yes. Yeah, he did have a mom, and mom came back to civilization with him in the story. But then she just gets high on soma for months until she dies, and just like doesn't even know who John is anymore, because she hated her life on the reservation because she's a party member through and through, kind of thing. Yeah, so that's where John comes from. That's the structure of the world there. Entertainment-wise, in 1984, there is very little joy. There's very little like fun that people have. The fun that people at least say they have are like hateful government things, like 2 Minutes Hate, or going to see hangings of people that committed thought crimes. Like people like watch people get killed and like sort of talk about it like it's fun. In the Brave New World, entertainment is much better. They have a thing called the feelies. And the feelies are like movies, but you go to the movies and you put your hands on like metal things, and the metal things somehow communicate with your nervous system so you can feel whatever in any spot. So a lot of times this is like super porn that people go see together, and you feel what's happening in the story. Like you feel the bed or you feel whatever.
Right.
And there's like smells that get pumped in. So it's just like meant to be a super immersive experience. These super movies that people go see.
Mm-hmm.
And people play sports, but they only play sports that involve a lot of equipment and ensure that a lot of consumption will be done. So they have things like obstacle golf and electromagnetic golf, where you just like you have to buy a lot of equipment to even play the game. They like nobody plays soccer or anything like that because it's cheap and you wouldn't have to buy stuff anymore. And the whole system only works if people keep buying stuff.
Right.
It all feels very much like it comes from a Western industrial world that goes like further and further that way. And consumption is still a part of it. I don't know how they're not running out of resources, probably recycling very efficiently or something like that. Everybody's encouraged to throw away if they have clothes that get damaged in any way. Like that's trash. Don't be wearing that. They say the more stitches, the less riches. Like if you got stuff that's repaired, you're a poor person, and they'll just.
But everybody's pretty much communist anyway, right? There's not really like are people competing in a free market to build money, or are they just?
No, because they end up spending. No, nobody like. There's no reference to like saving money or anything like that. Everybody gets fed.
They do at least get paid different amounts for different jobs.
God, I don't even know if it mentions pay. I don't think money ever comes up once.
Makes sense. Because they don't really think about it.
I don't think so.
They don't really think about how much money do I have. They just think about all my needs are met.
Right. Maybe.
Whatever.
I mean, maybe there is money, but it's just not worth mentioning in the context of the story. I'm not sure. But they at least care about looking like they're rich, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Brave New World, there's an emphasis on keeping up appearances. Not so much in 1984.
I guess there is to an extent, but it's a very different kind of appearance. It's just making sure that you keep up an appearance of being really mad at Eastasia or Eurasia. Like, just like when people will walk up to, when people will be like, hey, good morning, Trav. Man, really pissed at those Mongol pieces of shit. Am I right? And they just like will talk like that. Like,
okay.
They'll just like want to make sure that like they let you know I really care about what the government cares about. But no, yeah, everybody seems to love the government in the Brave New World, like sincerely. So it's just making sure that you appear happy, I guess, is what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Happiness seems to be the highest value in the Brave New World. That's encouraged
Okay.
a lot. Like you need to try and be happy. Sex. In 1984, sex is like a kind of a gross thing to do, but it's like a necessity that a married couple would do for the party because they have to, but they don't like it. They don't like doing it. It's like a miserable, uncomfortable thing that they're doing out of hate for Eurasia, not out of any sort of desire to have a kid or desire for the other person. Winston describes having been like married at one point and just the like stiff, horrible experiences that he had with his wife, and that they didn't have a baby. So then they, like, the government recommended that they got divorced like a few years after because they didn't have a kid. So sex is something that is discouraged, illegal outside of marriage. Like, it's not legal to have sex. He ends up meeting a woman who's like apparently just been like, she just knows how to pick. She can just look in people's eyes and tell, like, you're thinking. I can tell that you're working the way I'm working, and then can like lure them and have sex with them, which Winston is not jealous of. He's excited that there's someone so corrupt in the world. That's like such an incredible thing to him. Like, there's someone who's so bad, and he's happy about that.
And she was someone who was just having fun with the whole situation. She wasn't a thought police undercover.
Yeah, she was
or
just
anything.
enjoying the sex. Just enjoyed being a rebel. Yeah.
Right.
The sex in Brave New World is encouraged. It's free love. It's completely unsacred. It's like has no importance. You shouldn't get jealous or care about giving it to somebody. Everybody is constantly told that everyone belongs to everyone. And that means that if somebody wants you, like, they have you. Like, they'll have you. And you don't say no to people. You don't say, like, no, I won't go home with you. You just do it. You just go do that. The main character, Bernard, he ends up thinking about how, like, there's a girl that he kind of likes, but then he hears other guys talking about her, and they're like, have you had Lenina? And they're like, I don't think I have. Oh, she's quite nice. You simply must try her. I think I will. And they talk about each other like they're meat.
Right.
And Bernard gets really pissed in his head about that, about like they're talking about her like she's meat. And you know what? That's how she thinks about herself too. Everybody's just fucking meat. So yeah, sex is extremely encouraged, even in kids. It is discussed. So the way that kids get raised is all in group settings at facilities because nobody has parents. They're just raised by the party. So they end up getting raised in groups. And then like there's reference to like how the kids just get playtime. Like they'll be out in the yard, but like mostly the kids are just pairing up and playing what they refer to as erotic games. And it doesn't crassly go any further than that, but it just says that like, and like there's a reference at one point where like two characters are walking along and then they yell at these kids like, hey, get out of here, little boy, get out of here, little girl, go play your erotic game somewhere else. They're just like, it's just like sex just happens, and it happens with kids, and it's just considered a normal part of development. There's a scene where somebody is like a senior person.
Well, not a normal part of development. There's no developing, right? It's just at any age, sex has no meaning. That's the ideology. It's not even like, part of growing up is having sex. No, there's no relation between growing up and having sex. Regardless of your age or situation, it's nothing but people making each other feel good. So,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Fuck, I lost my train of thought. So the kids get raised in these groups, and they have sex with each other. And
at one point, there's people walking, and they're like, get out of here, little boy. Get out of here, little girl. Go play your erotic games somewhere else. And then you said, oh, man. Evan's reading Wikipedia articles on history. Oh, interesting. I didn't even hear it. Evan said there was a siren.
Okay, but yeah.
And then you said it's just a normal part of development, and then you were about to say something else.
That's it. Okay, senior person is talking to some younger people about history and about like the history of the world and how things used to be before the party came to power. And he was like, this may be hard to believe, but at one point in society, our ancestors actually told their children that they should not engage in any erotic play until they're as old as 20. And everyone is like laughing and like, what? Whoa. Like it's just such a crazy concept to them that sex would ever mean anything and shouldn't in any situation just be done. Everybody choose, I think just the men. I don't think any women are ever doing it. And I think the men will chew gum that is sex hormone gum. I assume to like make it so that they can come more often, basically, just so they can have more sex. But yeah, people chew sex hormone gum.
But they're not reproducing anyway.
No. But it's just more fun. They just want to do it more often.
Yeah, it's just
fun.
all a big playpen.
It's all a big playpen. And they are, like, you had mentioned earlier how, like, childish it seems. And they are encouraged to be, like, you should always be childlike. You should never lose your childlike desire to just be enjoying life and having fun. Like, you go do your job, but then after that, you need to be trying to have as much happiness as you can.
Right.
Which is what they equate being a child with, which I don't really think is a very good equation, but...
Right. That's not quite coherent.
No. In 1984, there is no like healthcare. Nobody gets like really taken care of. People are disposable. We're at war. We don't have time to be doing any of that. Winston has like a bad injury on his leg the whole book, and it like throbs at different points, different amounts, but he's just always feels like shit. Everybody feels like shit. The healthcare in the Brave New World, though, is very good. Everybody's given drugs to like stay youthful. So 60-year-olds are, you can tell a little bit in their face, but they're as spry and athletic, as energetic as somebody who's 20. Like, they just are all kept on drugs to stay youthful and to make sure that they stay healthy for their whole lives. And eventually, they get brought to, what do they call it, like a dying center or something like that. Like, once they get sick because they're old, they're brought to a dying center where they have no intention of saving them. This is just, it's a hospice to help them pass. But their bar for who is hospice worthy is much, much lower than ours. And they have no interest in saving anyone. And it's like and the people have no interest in being saved because this is just what it is. Like, yeah, we die. And then I think it mentions that they'll get burned up and that their ashes get used for some sort of chemical production that will contribute to the next generation of people. So it just feels like they're going back into the cycle, kind of. Like they all feel like they're all just one big family, I guess. That's how they think of it. The history that's told to people in 1984 is all bullshit. They make up whatever they want to make up. The history in Brave New World seems to be basically true. Like they don't seem to pull any punches about like what happened leading up to this point or like what the old world used to be like. They do have the lens that everything that in the old world was very bad and very backwards. Like that's the spin on everything, but they basically tell the truth. They're basically not lying. Marriage in 1984 is something that is only done if the government says so. If the government recommends that this would be a good match, if you guys are at similar tiers in the caste system or whatever. Marriage in Brave New World is ridiculous. Like, if you are having sex with the same person for a month, like that's a big problem. Like, hey, that's not a good look. What are you doing? Like, you need to be mixing this up. Can't be getting like attached to just one person. That's no good. Marriage is something that's still practiced in like the reservations, but it's ridiculous to the outsiders, even to like the sane outsiders. Like, I can't believe you would do that. Even to like the most sane character in the story, marriage seems like so dumb. I think that's most of the comparisons there. So the 1984 is very much bureaucratized. It's like a bureaucracy has taken over the whole world, and everybody is scared of the torture that they'll go through if they don't do what the government wants them to do. Whereas in the Brave New World, everybody is just happy because they're all high if they're not happy, and they love their government, and they just do everything out of love for each other. It seems, at least that's how they view it. That's why they think they're doing it.
A kind of affection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for there to be, if you want to formulate a really high, wise form of love, it needs to be grounded in some kind of higher power, which isn't a thing in either of these books, right?
Yeah, not really. In Brave New World, they refer to so many of the names are like names of famous people from like the 40s and 50s, which I don't know why. I don't know how that fits with the timeline, but that's beside the point. But they refer to Ford. They refer to Ford like God, and also to Freud like God. Like they refer to. They say like my Freud or my Ford, and they kind of think that those are the same person because they're kind of saying like this is like the philosopher that rules and the businessman that rules. So there's kind of like this vague character that they don't really nail down, but they do refer to something they call our Ford, despite the fact that they're not really referring to like the guy that made the car Ford, and they're not really referring to Sigmund Freud. They don't know that much about Freud, but it's just like the name they give to it. And in 1984, no, there's no God. There's nothing like that. There's
Just
nothing
Big Brother.
after you die. There's only Big Brother. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so in Brave New World, you could have your own religious theory and nobody would really care. You could say, I think we go here and here after we die, or I think life means this, or I think this is the highest value. You could freely say that, and it just wouldn't catch on. Nobody would be interested.
Yeah, I think you could say that. But if you started getting any traction, it would be a problem. Like if you're upsetting the stability of the system, then that would become a problem. But if that's just something fun that you talk about and it's not really causing any problems, it seems like that would be okay if you had ideas.
There'd probably be plenty of random Soma ramblings that would just blend in with.
True. Yeah.
I'm on the moon. I think the universe is made of love. Whatever. Just ramble about
That's
whatever you want to ramble about.
Yeah. Yeah. A big part of like another big line that kind of comes from 1984 is that Big Brother is always watching, and everybody in 1984 believes that Big Brother is watching, believes that like there is a camera somewhere that is currently watching them. All the telescreens, which are TVs that are in basically every room, they all have cameras built into them. So if you're inside of a telescreen, yeah, you probably are like being seen. But then people also just have ideas that like they're probably just everywhere. They're probably like hidden in places that I don't even know. So everybody constantly assumes that Big Brother is watching, even when maybe he's watching less than half the time. Like maybe the government is seeing less than half of what goes on, but you're still going to behave yourself 100% of the time because it seems like they could be anywhere and they could be watching you right now. So that's what motivates them a lot, I guess.
Right. And in Brave New World, you don't really need to enforce the totalitarian government by monitoring anybody. You just need to keep everybody chill. Right.
Because everybody they don't need, like, they're happy about their servitude. They love their servitude. They also feel like the servitude is to them. They're not even serving just everyone else. They're serving everyone else plus them because we're all kind of the same. We're all like working together here towards something.
Right. So they don't feel that they're under a totalitarian government. They feel that they're participating in a whole, and they feel that by prioritizing the whole, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They feel like they're serving the whole, so they are greater than.
Right.
Like that's their sense of meaning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But really, they're serving a totalitarian government.
It's not clear that they really are. I mean, it could be that they really are. Like, it all is just pretty good. Like, they're
just chilling.
It doesn't. I don't. There's no real reason to believe that there is somewhere like a bunch of fat cats that are smoking cigars and like laughing at those guys, because like those guys are all good. Like, whatever those guys would be doing would be just the same thing as these guys are doing, like drugs and sex.
Yeah.
That's
meaningless pleasure. That would be what it was all serving anyway.
Right. So, yeah, it doesn't really seem like there is like a guy somewhere that is in charge of all this or anything like that, or like a group that is taking everything for themselves at the expense of the rest of them, because everybody's got plenty, it seems like.
Right.
And then one more thing I wanted to mention on 1984 was just that each of the ministries, there's 4 different ministries that run different parts of the government.
I want to ask Evan a question. He might not know, but he could Google it while you say these if he doesn't. What is the definition of ministry exactly? Okay, he's going to look that up.
So there's the Ministry of Truth, which is the one that Winston works for, which is actually the propaganda wing. So it's like everything is also that double think thing where you're saying the opposite of what this is actually about. The Ministry of Peace is the one that discusses the war that's currently going on. The Ministry of Love I don't even know what they do. I don't even remember what that one does.
Okay.
And the Ministry of Plenty. Government Department.
Oh, ministry means government department. Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Okay. And the minister is the head of the department. Cool. I didn't know it had a totally non-religious connotation definition.
And then there's the Ministry of Plenty, which is the team that would discuss food and getting resources out to the people, which is always scarce. But everybody is always saying that they're stoked about how well things are going and how much easier it is to get whatever than it was before, even though it wasn't. But they're just very willing to accept this new story. A very funny scene. At one point, they are in the middle of getting a pitch. They're like being told about what's going on with the war with Eurasia, and then in like the middle of the broadcast, they say, and the war with they start saying that we're at war with East Asia and that Eurasia is our ally, with no explanation as to like the fact that we've just switched from sentence to sentence who we're at war with. But then everybody, when they see, oh, we're at war with East Asia and Eurasia is our ally, they look around and they see all the propagandistic posters about the Eurasians and about how about these evil Eurasians that are out to get them. And then they start yelling that Goldstein must have done this. He must have put up all these fake posters of our ally.
Interesting.
And then they all like freak out and they start ripping down the posters and like cursing Goldstein.
So that's part of the point of them, of the government propping up an antagonist, is like, we need somewhere to dump, as long as there's an antagonist on the table, whenever something goes wrong, everybody will just dump it on that person.
Right.
Just go, this is bad. Who's responsible? Well, the bad guy, it must be.
Right. And they're completely willing to just accept that the bad guy was the good guy a second ago, and he's the bad guy now, and that's fine. And this, I must have imagined a second ago when I was cool with all these posters being up. I was crazy then.
Right.
And you made me think of one thing I was going to forget to mention. People in the Brave New World, women will end up sometimes feeling some sort of sadness in their like early 20s, and they believe it to be related to pregnancy and to like wanting like a biological desire to have a pregnancy. So they have pregnancy substitutes, like drugs that they're given that make your body like believe that it had a baby, to like trick your body into getting over that depression that happens as a result of there being no chance that they're going to have a baby.
Right.
And you mentioned like that they need to have someone to get like their aggression out on, basically in 1984. They will take what's called the VPS. It's violent passion substitutes. And that's like drugs that they'll take that will make them feel as though they just like got really mad at somebody and like got a release of like yelling and screaming at somebody. Like they take drugs to make them feel the positive effects that your body somehow wants, even though it's a negative thing that leads to it. Well, pregnancy is not a negative thing that leads to it. In their eyes, it's a negative thing that leads to it. But yeah. So they take these drugs to make them feel these human experiences that they've decided are no good, and we need to get rid of those. So violence, if you feel the desire for violence or the desire for pregnancy, there's a pill for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that came up for me was whether there is a dark side to the live in the now doctrine that we've never discussed, which is that it is a kind of it's an opiate for the masses kind of ideology if you take it to an extreme. I've noticed that like Peterson, for example, he has the past authoring and future authoring, and his view on living in the moment is that if you're properly grounded in a narrative that has some continuity, so you're grounded in your past, you're grounded in your future, you understand where you came from, you understand where you're intending to go, and you understand that your current mode of conduct is moving you from where you came from to where you intend to go. at that point, you can live in the moment because you're confident enough in your trajectory that you don't have to constantly check in about, wait, am I still properly oriented from the past that I came from, that I have a decent grasp on, to the future I'm intending to manifest for myself? Just like if you ride a bike to the gas station that's right down the street and you know exactly where you're going, you're not going to be thinking about where you're going. You can just experience the bike ride. But if you go on an aimless bike ride, you do have to think about, wait, where am I going to end up? How long am I going to be gone? Where am I exactly? Or drive's an even better example because you're like, am I going to run out of gas if I just drive in a random direction?
Sure.
So do you think that doctrine on its own, that you should live in the here and now, is harmful if it doesn't have the disclaimer that you can only live in the moment insofar as you are properly oriented with the past and with your intended future?
Yeah, I think I guess it can, because thinking is useful. Thinking is certainly useful to get you out of situations. And it feels like their point is mainly to like stop thinking. And being present in the moment does kind of stop thinking. You're not...
Yes.
If you're thinking, you are not really present in the moment, unless
right.
there's some way you can do those things at the same time that I don't understand, but I doubt it.
There is the sense in which you are currently experiencing the thought that you're having, but when we say live in the moment, we're talking about your intention being fully immersed in your external experience.
In the physical world, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that it does have... I don't know if you could even say that it really has a negative effect on these people. Well, no, I would say it does, because these people have to be kind of turned off, in a sense, to get to the point where they're at here. To get to the Brave New World, they have to be not thinking. That has to be part of it. So
Right.
separating them as much from past and future maybe is just a good way to do that, because it is also a peaceful and valuable thing to do. Like, it does make you feel good if you can meditate properly and not be thinking while you're doing it. That's a good break to get.
Right.
So it just like also suits their purposes, that like that positive thing for people is also a positive for the party. Like, it seems like that is the Brave New World operates based on making people happy about the fact that they're serving this group. And yeah, forcing everybody into like a lifelong meditative practice is kind of good for their mental health in a way. But because
mental health as such, right? Just mental health itself, the concept, is not grounded in any. It might be implicitly grounded in some kind of higher power, because the fact that you say there's a such thing as health means that you think there's a such thing as right from wrong. But you could say that even in the like our kind of postmodern mental health system in our real world is like, how can we keep everyone happy? It is kind of getting to that point already, where it's like, well, we pretty much we don't want to make sure that you're grounded in reality, because everybody has their own reality. There's no such thing as reality. We just want to make sure that you're happy enough to go to work and not cause any major inconvenience to anyone else. As long as you're there, we can put a stamp on your file that says you're functioning.
Yeah.
Because that was really the impression that I got in inpatient mental health treatment, was like they kept asking, because they would say things like, you can't function in society, you're not functional, and they would always take it back to, well, are you working? Are you able to take care of yourself? And it did seem like that was more the emphasis than like, are you grounded in objective reality? Because depending on the psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse or mental health counselor or MA that you're talking to, they may or may not believe there's any such thing as an objective reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they
Right.
still believe that there's a such thing as being sane or insane.
Right.
If they don't believe that there's a such thing as an objective reality, or if at least part of them doesn't believe that, then their ultimate goal is just to get you to go to work and not break any laws and not bother anybody.
Right.
So our system is already kind of creeping towards that Brave New World kind of approach to mental health.
Sure.
And when you say it is in a way good for your mental health to just enter into this lifelong meditative practice of living in the moment at all times and never thinking about the past and future.
Yeah.
That's very true in the postmodern sense.
Sure.
As long as because you're not going to break laws or cause problems or whatever if you're just seeking whatever pleasure is accessible to you. Doesn't require any difficulty because breaking the law requires some difficulty and free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just whatever pleasure is right in front of you. That's what you go for.
Right.
And that's mentally healthy, even in our postmodern definition in 2022.
Right. And if they were less mentally healthy, they would become more likely to become a problem for the system and to tear the system down, which a part of me, as I don't live in that system, does feel like is a good thing. Like, yeah, that system should be torn down so that people will be more human. But they don't seem to feel that way, and it might be hard to feel that way if you were in the situation that they're in. Yeah.
And one more thing about the mindfulness thing is I think a key difference is that the message of the yogis and Zen teachers is that you should be able to stop thinking, not that you should stop thinking altogether.
Great point. Yeah.
The modern Westerner doesn't know how to take a break from thinking. So there's no ability to interrupt the thought processes that cause negative thought patterns and negative cycles because you're just always thinking. And a modern Westerner does understand how to sit down. They do understand how to put their physical body onto a sofa, but they don't understand how to put their mind onto a sofa. So the message is like Maharishi's advice about he's the founder of Transcendental Meditation, and I'm studying that kind of meditation in school for those just tuning into this episode randomly. Maharishi's advice is to meditate for 20 minutes in the morning, meditate for 20 minutes in the evening. Mm-hmm. For the rest of the time, just do your fucking day. Just do your day. Don't not think, don't think about meditating at all for the rest of the day. Don't think about, would this be an enlightened way to approach this situation? Don't think, am I thinking too much? Don't do any of that. Just introduce the meditation into your daily life, and that's it. Because if you try to make a constant practice of not thinking, then you'll be constantly waving off red flags because you have all these parts of you, like we talked about in the last episode, No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. The parts of you will come forward and knock on your attention and say, hey, I have something to tell you. You made a declaration that you wanted to manifest a certain kind of future, but your behavior today is not aligning with that manifested future. Are you wanting to make an addendum to your original plan that you told us all to agree to, or what are we doing here? And your response, if your response is, I'm trying to live in the moment right now, be quiet. You're not letting yourself do your job.
Right.
So you have to think throughout the day. It requires thought to orient yourself to your past and your future. And it's a weird kind of self-abuse to try not to think all day. And it's not the advice of the Zen masters and yogis to not think all day.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because it is certainly useful. It's just that for most people, thought is a runaway train that they have no control over. And
That's right.
It's not something that they can start, run effectively, and then stop. It's just something that's always running, but not in any clear direction.
Exactly.
Not a very structured way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being able to stop thinking temporarily represents a kind of psychic graduation, because it's like, so is your body in charge of you, or are you in charge of your body? Is your mind in charge of you, or are you in charge of your mind? This isn't about like a power hierarchy. Mm-hmm. So it's not really being in charge of, but it's more like, do you have the ability to transcend that level of your being? Because you're a body, you're a mind, and then you're probably you're probably a whole stack of other shit, right? That's deeper and more fundamental than all that. So it's just like, at what level of consciousness are you? Yeah. Okay, so if you are actively let's say, in a schizophrenic episode where, like, I saw a woman like this at the hospital. She would just walk in circles. She couldn't sit down. So she's even lower than just the body, her level of consciousness.
Yeah.
She can't just sit down. Take somebody who is in a low functioning, like they're far on the autism spectrum, low functioning autism. You can't necessarily just tell them to sit down.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody with Down syndrome who's like really hyped up. There are people who cannot just sit down. So that's the thing. So, okay, so you can sit down. Okay, now then, can you stop thinking? So if you can stop thinking, then you're just above the body and the mind. So then maybe could you take the rest a step further? So instead of just sitting down on the couch, can you actually tell all of the various muscles in your body to relax? Can you intentionally relax? Okay, now as you move from, now that your body is very relaxed, can you do the same thing to your mind? Can you tell your mind to completely and deeply relax? Well, now you're somewhere that's beyond that. Now you're in kind of the imagination. Mm-hmm. So now can you navigate your imagination consciously? Or do you just fall into your imagination? Mm-hmm. So there's all of these different like levels to it, right? And that's what it's about, is like graduating to a higher level of your being, not so that you can lord over your being or be a totalitarian government unto yourself, but just so that you can, when you make a choice, you're actually the one making that choice. Like you say, I want to be here by next month, and you can actually take your body and mind to that future that you want to manifest because you have that, because you're on that level, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well said. As far as what feels more likely between the two of these things to me, like there are aspects of both of them that do feel like they're taking shape in the world. They feel like in some ways like aligned and cooperative because they're both moving towards one world government. I view it as like two smoke monsters that are like teaming up and are kind of one cloud, but they both like think they're going to come out on top. I don't know why they have to be smoke, but they're like, they both think they're going to come out on top, and they're like ideologies that are cooperating, but they think they're going to be the one that comes out on top. And it's not totally clear which one it's going to be. If you look at the CCP, it's clearly 1984. Like they're just doing, it's like they read 1984 and said, let's do this. Let's do it this way. But Brave New World feels much more reminiscent of America now. That feels like the way that America is headed towards a more freedom, less family, less meaning, like less things mean anything, including sex, less God, more drugs,
like less of a universal moral standard.
Totally, yeah. So it feels like that's the direction that we are headed. But I also feel like we've kind of talked about these two books as seeming like one is What If the World Fell Left, and the other is What If the World Fell Right.
Right, and I was trying to map it that way listening. I was like, it doesn't map that well that way.
Not great. I mean, 1984 is clearly the more right one, and Brave New World, I think, is the more left one, but it's not a clean line between the two.
Right.
And I also feel that just because things look like they're going one way doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to go that way. If it becomes evident to most of the people in America that, oh, I think we're about to become 1984, we could end up fighting so hard against that we fall the other way. That, like, in an attempt to stave off religious extremism from becoming, like, a force, we could end up like pushing so far away that we like fall towards nothing means anything. Like I think it could go that way, that just because it seems to be going one way, you know, maybe like a bunch of liberal policies are in place, but then a strong man comes in and is like, no, we're not doing any of this shit anymore. We're locking this down. I've had about enough, and I think you have too, America. Like, and he comes in, and he comes in and does that. Like, we could just go the other way super fast.
Yep.
Do you have any insight into like whether you think one feels more likely 50 years from now?
I found myself thinking more about whether there are coherent answers to some of these questions. Like when it comes to what's a coherent answer to the question of drugs, and to the question of sex, for example, I found myself thinking like, what is the middle road on these? If I showed up on a planet and I wanted to know what the policies are, right, on sex and drugs, what to me would be the most encouraging, inspiring, beautiful answer? That's what I found myself thinking about. And when it came to drugs, it seems like people doing drugs rarely, and people doing drugs intentionally, and people doing drugs supervised. That just felt like it made sense to me. Like
Sure.
like opium for medical reasons, for surgeries, for extreme pain, but it's always supervised and administered in a really secure way. Psychedelics being used for people's benefits in a secured way, very, very rarely. Things like that. It's like, oh, these people do drugs like adults, and they even have the freedom. They could go out and buy drugs and just do them however they want. And a small amount of people do, but really, for the most part, everybody's mature enough to understand that drugs are drugs. And then with sex, it's like, the older I get, the more the church's answer to that question makes sense to me. What do we do with sex exactly? Is it everybody does it with whoever? Is it you only do it to procreate? The answer that it's for this is the Protestant answer, that it's for pleasure and procreation in the context of a lifelong partnership. That makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, if I showed up on a planet, the perfect planet to me would be, so the mainstream answer, what most people do, is drugs only supervised, only intentional, very, very rarely. Sex only in lifelong partnerships, for pleasure and for procreation, but only in lifelong partnerships. But then it would also be a good thing if it's like, oh, some people just fuck like crazy, some people just do drugs like crazy. You got crackheads on the street fucking like crazy, and that's a thing. That's a choice. Some people do that. But for the most part, people just have sex in marriage, and people just do drugs very, very rarely for intentional reasons, supervised. That, to me, would be like the best world. Like, okay, so you have the choice, but only like 2 or 3% of people make that choice.
Right.
So, like, thinking about Earth and where we're at right now, there's a little bit of an excess of drugs and fucking, but really, most people, like, even with the sex thing, maybe not most people are having sex married, but most people are just having sex with one partner that they're committed to. That is what most people are doing with sex.
I think so. Yeah.
And then drugs. Most people are doing drugs rarely, intentionally, and supervised. So it's like, you don't think most drugs are administered intentionally and supervised? No. More drugs are done on the streets.
Yeah.
Most people, though. Do the majority of people...
Yeah, most people don't. I mean, well, they drink. Most people drink.
Yeah, that's true.
I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Not a very articulate answer because I'm just spitballing right now as we talk. But I actually felt kind of hopeful. Like, I felt like, you know what? We're not that bad. Like, if I showed up to Earth and it's like, hey, everybody could just be a crackhead prostitute, but very, very few people are.
Right.
I'd be like, you should have the freedom to do that. And most people hopefully choose not to. And I'm not saying it's just a choice, whatever. But I feel kind of good about where we're at.
Now?
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, we do... I agree with what you're saying. Like, the uniformity is a problem. Like, if everybody is doing the same thing, like, that doesn't look great. Like, it looks good if we're all okay somewhat with different choices being made. Like, we can accept...
Yeah, there's some flexibility.
Someone wanting to be a hoe. Like, we can accept that in our society.
Yeah.
Even though it's not what most people are doing.
Right.
Yeah, we are, like... We're balancing right now. Like, we haven't, like, really fallen totally. We're pretty balanced.
I find both of these books unbelievably unrealistic because the polarity principle, the yin-yang principle, is that anytime you try to pull things in one direction, they're going to pull in the other direction. And I think, like, It makes sense that Brave New World says we've been doing this for 300 years, and 1984 says we've been doing this for 30, because that 1984 shit would not last long.
It doesn't feel like it. Yeah,
like
I get what you're saying.
China can get away with doing that shit. They probably have more uprisings than we know, and this might be an absolute abuse of the concept of polarity. I'm just spitballing. There's places like China where things are way too 1984, but that's only because they're counterbalanced planetarily by places like we have Skid Row. You know what I mean? Where you can just do absolutely anything that you want. You can say anything you want, smoke anything you want, fuck anything you want. There are pockets in the Western world that are just an absolute playpen.
Right.
And then there are places...
hedonism.
Yeah, it's just nothing but hedonism.
Yeah.
All you see in every direction is hedonism. Like pockets in Seattle. So maybe China is only able to do that because polarity balances against it in that sense. And if you try to just...
I'm open to that, yeah.
But that might be incoherent, because maybe if a whole planet was 1984, there'd be another planet somewhere that's Brave New World.
Good point.
So, like, who knows if that really makes sense. But as I listen to both of those stories, I'm like, that shit would not fly. Because anytime you say something, somebody pops up to say the opposite thing. We cannot help it. You say something crazy, I guarantee you I'm going to say the equal and opposite crazy thing. And we just do it nonstop. And I thank God for that.
Yeah, I mean, we do want to... There's something in us that wants to, like... If we see something precariously like that's barely balancing, we do kind of want to knock it over. And I'm referring here to not the balance that we're in now. I mean, like a precarious situation like the 1984 world existing. Like people are just going to want to... That's too uniform. They want to knock that down. They don't like that. Yeah. There's a Huxley quote that I wanted to read here. It's a foreword that he wrote. I think it was like 15 years after he wrote Brave New World. And it's him kind of reflecting on some things that he doesn't like about the book and some of the ways that he presented certain things. The character John, the Savage, he ends up coming back with his mother and with Bernard to the civilized world. And in the civilized world, he's introduced to where like his mom used to live and where he's been hearing about this sort of mythical place that he's been hearing about since he was born. And now it's like he's coming to where he was supposed to be, is what he feels like. But when he's there, he goes real crazy because, well, I mean, he goes real sane. The world is real crazy. And he ends up at one point like at the dying center where his mom dies, and then like a bunch of little kids are crowding around. They're like, "Oh, is this a dead person?" And like they just don't care. To him, this is like his mother. It's my mom is dead in front of me here, and all these kids are like, "Ooh, interesting," because death is no big deal. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's like just a part of the cycle. And he ends up like scaring the kids because he like yells at them to get away from here, get away from me, get away from her, don't touch her. And then a bunch of people bring soma to like give to these kids because they're all getting upset. A bunch of people in the room are upset now. So people are feeling negative thoughts. So they bring in drugs. John ends up like knocking them and saying like, "I'm freeing you from these." And he's like throwing them out the window and stuff. And the two other sane people help him, Bernard and another guy named Heimholtz. But like his two friends end up helping him in this situation. And then Bernard and Heimholtz, they get exiled to an island. I think they go to Greenland, and the two of them are going to go. But John is still there, and he has to have a conversation with Mustafa Mond, the leader of that region. And Mustafa tells him basically that he like wants to go with them to the island, but he is forced to stay in the civilized world where he doesn't want to be. And just giving you that story because it's referenced here. Today, I feel no wish to demonstrate that sanity is impossible. On the contrary, though I remain no less sadly certain than in the past that sanity is a rather rare phenomenon, I am convinced that it can be achieved and would like to see more of it. If I were now to rewrite the book, I would offer the Savage a third alternative. Now, he wanted to go to the island with them. The two options that he's referencing here are stay here in civilized society or go to the island with your buddies, but he forces them to stay there. I would offer the savage a third alternative. Between the utopian and the primitive horns of his dilemma would lie the possibility of sanity, a possibility already actualized to some extent in a community of exiles and refugees from the brave new world living within the borders of the reservation. I don't know all these words that I'm going to say here, but he's going to describe the government system. In this community, economics would be decentralist and Henry Georgian, politics Kropotkin-esque, cooperative. Science and technology would be used as though, like the Sabbath, they had been made for man, not, as at present and still more so in Brave New World, as though man were adapted and enslaved to them. Religion would be the conscious and intelligent pursuit of man's final end, the unitive knowledge of the immanent Tao, or Logos, the transcendent Godhead, or Brahman, and the prevailing philosophy of life would be a kind of higher utilitarianism in which the greatest happiness principle would be secondary to the, I said it wrong both times, secondary to the final end principle. The first question to be asked and answered in every contingency of life being, how will this thought or action contribute to or interfere with the achievement by me and the greatest possible number of other individuals of man's final end? So that is what he now, like as a 15-year-old older man, thinks like there is actually a way that society could be structured that wouldn't be crazy.
So to try and summarize, because that was a fucking run-on sentence and a half. I see where Jordan Peterson learned how to talk from.
So many asides. Yeah.
What he's saying is there is a such thing as sanity because there is a such thing as ultimate reality, which is identified by the Taoist religion, by Greek philosophy, by the Christian religion, by the Vedic, Hindu, Buddhist train of thought. Mm-hmm. So he's saying all of that, there's in all of these different systems, there's a concept of ultimate reality that is the transcendent, that is God, that is the Tao, that is Brahman, that is Logos. And if that is primary and every other system, whether it be politics or technology or education, is secondary to the achievement of total union with the divine, mm-hmm. then there would be a such thing as a sane society that would naturally practice moderation in politics, technology, and all other sectors. That's what he's saying?
Yeah, that the goal is that we need to all be on the same page with God, and that should be what society should be driving for primarily.
Yeah, that everything should be organized around the pursuit of that highest principle.
Yes, yeah. And anything is secondary to that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So he does have in mind that there is he thinks it's not as doomed as he thought it was when he wrote Brave New World.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share what... So...
And wait, let me say one other thing about that.
Core. Core.
There are certain things that you can only get from religion. Jung identified religion as a counterbalance to mass-mindedness for, I think, this reason. Because a lot of people present organized religion as mass-mindedness itself. Like, that's where mass-mindedness come from, is these religions are created and they say everybody has to agree on everything. Mm-hmm. That's mass-mindedness. But if everything is organized around a principle, and if that principle is genuinely good and transcendent, then there's a sort of sanity enforced. And for... the first thing that every totalitarian government does is get rid of the worship of any higher power because they're trying to take that place. They're trying to manufacture an artificial reality where they are the transcendent, Logos, Tao, etc. So I just think that the reason that I'm going to school for yoga studies now and divinity for my master's is because my diagnosis of the current world is that it's disconnected from that transcended concept, exactly what Aldous Huxley is saying. So I've thought about going to school to be a mental health counselor, but as a mental health counselor, you're expected to affirm whatever somebody's goal is for their life, whatever their vision is of themselves, whatever they think they are, whatever they think they want, whatever they think life is. You have to try and help them organize their life around their own vision for what life should be. But there really does need to be structures that say, hey, if you're actually humble enough to ask, what you are, what life is all about, what you're all about, what the purpose of life is, and how that translates to your daily morals and ethics, then you can come here and we will give you that guidance. And that's what the church is. And I feel that the world needs more of that. But also, like, I agree with Aldous Huxley's use of Tao, because Brahmin is from the Vedas. So that's a Hindu and Buddhist term.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tao obviously is from China, but a slightly different train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And then he used logos from Greek philosophy. And then he used the transcendent, which is just a general term.
Godhead.
And he used Godhead from so
that's also the same as Brahman, right?
Brahman is the same. Godhead is the Western word, and Brahman is the Eastern word, but they refer to the same concept. Yeah, which is the ultimate.
Okay.
Brahman is absolutely the ultimate in Eastern terms. So I agree with Aldous Huxley's analysis that the best way to define the sane, the ultimate reality, where sanity is grounded, the best way to do it is to use everybody's terms, to be as fucking specific as possible. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're talking about the Godhead. Yes, we're talking about the Tao. Yes, we're talking about Brahman. Yes, we're talking about the transcendent. Yes, we're talking about logos. Everybody's described it. I feel like there needs to be more of that work, like more interreligious work to be done to define that concept and organize structures around it. That's like what he's saying. Like, there's a such thing as a sane world, but it would have to be organized like this. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do we go from there are people who are willing to go to the religions, humble themselves, and ask for guidance that's thousands of years old, instead of just make up whatever the fuck they think they're supposed to be doing with their lives. But those people are often committed to the idea that one religion is right rather than another.
Right.
How do we get to a point where we take religious wisdom with the utmost seriousness, sincerely, but we understand that they all offer wisdom? Right. That's going to be a really, really hard transition.
I mean, it makes sense to me. Like, I'm sure that it could totally make sense to people because it makes sense to me. I'm sure that it's possible, but yeah, that's tough.
We just need more people with the authority and education to articulate that in a way that's serious. Like, because there's a difference between some teenager taking mushrooms and saying, like, all the religions have truth, man, but they really have real wisdom for us. Like, it needs to be real, ordained, educated, scientifically literate, good writers, saying, without these organizing principles, we are absolutely beyond a doubt fucked. And thinking that all these religious systems are stupid except for one will absolutely fuck us too. Yeah. So let's do something that's in between. Let's take this issue very, very seriously. Yeah. That to me is like the greatest antidote to the current chaos of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done some reading about Aldous Huxley, and there's a lot of details that I wanted to tell you that I'm not going to go into because it's like so much of what he believed is specifically fascinating to you, but not necessarily relevant to this book. But yeah, he thought along very similar lines that you think along, I guess. Yeah. I wanted to read this letter. This is the open letter that Aldous Huxley wrote to George Orwell after reading his book in 1949.
Dope.
Agreeing with all the critics that have written of it, I need not tell you yet once more how fine and how profoundly important the book is. May I speak instead of the thing with which the book deals, the ultimate revolution? The first hints of a philosophy of the ultimate revolution, the revolution which lies beyond politics and economics, and which aims at a total subversion of the individual's psychology and physiology, are to be found in Marquis de Sade, who regarded himself as the continuator, the consummator of Robespierre and Babot. Dude, that was so many asides, too. That was such a long sentence. The philosophy of the ruling minority in 1984 is a sadism which has been carried to its logical conclusion by going beyond sex and denying it. Whether in actual fact the policy of the boot on the face can go on indefinitely seems doubtful. My own belief that the ruling oligarchy will find less arduous and wasteful ways of governing and of satisfying its lust for power, and these ways will resemble those which I described in Brave New World. I have had occasion recently to look into the history of animal magnetism and hypnotism, and have been greatly struck by the way in which, for 150 years, the world has refused to take serious cognizance of the discoveries of Mesner, Braid, Esdale, and the rest. I looked up those names. They're all
I know those
pioneers in
guys.
hypnotism.
Oh, yeah, I know those guys.
Partly because of the prevailing materialism and partly because of prevailing respectability, 19th century philosophers and men of science were not willing to investigate the odder facts of psychology for practical men, such as politicians, soldiers, and policemen, to apply in the field of government. Thanks to the voluntary ignorance of our fathers, the advent of the ultimate revolution was delayed for 5 or 6 generations. Another lucky accident was Freud's inability to hypnotize successfully and his consequent. That's it, thank you. Disparagement of hypnotism. This delayed the general application of hypnotism to psychiatry for at least 40 years. But now, psychoanalysis is being combined with hypnosis, and hypnosis has been made easy and indefinitely extensible through the use of barbiturates, which induce a hypnoid and suggestible state even in the most recalcitrant subjects. Within the next generation, I believe that the world's rulers will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. In other words, I feel that the nightmare of 1984 is destined to modulate into the nightmare of a world more resembling Brave New World. The change will be brought about as a result of a felt need for increased efficiency. Meanwhile, of course, there may be a large-scale biological and atomic war, in which case we shall have nightmares of other and scarcely imaginable kinds. So Huxley's opinion is that he thinks 1984 is something that cannot last very long, and that happens on the way to Brave New World. If Brave New World happens, something like 1984 happens on the way there, is what he feels.
Interesting.
But he also feels that 1984 implies wars, biological or nuclear, on a scale that could potentially make anything happen, any sort of Fallout Mad Max kind of scenario happen, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
So that was a very interesting insight and something that I hadn't even really considered when I was thinking about what is more likely. What there is a possibility that one is just before the other.
But you did consider that in the sense that you've always been cognizant of the fact that, in the same sense that, look at me stringing fucking asides together now. So when somebody balances on a tightrope, right? They have like a long 20-foot pole.
Yeah.
If you watch them fall, it's because the last thing that'll happen before they fall is they'll veer so far in the opposite direction that they almost fall, and then they'll correct and fall the other direction.
Right.
You've always been really cognizant of that concept, and that the world could go super liberal because it almost goes too conservative, and the liberals just ruin everything over correcting, or vice versa.
Sure.
And so you have considered that, and that connects to what he's saying, is that we go 1984, and then we overcorrect so far that we fall into Brave New World.
Yeah, I suppose it is kind of what he's... Yeah, similar, but I guess I hadn't thought through the fact that we could go all the way there and then go all the way there. I guess.
You're thinking we could almost go there.
Yeah, we could start to show hints of going that way and then go the other way. But yeah, it is possible that we could go straight up all the way there. And then after the war finishes, then we live in the Brave New World. Could be something like
Right.
that.
Then everybody just wants to smoke pot for a century.
Yeah.
Hey, can we just take a century off? It's been crazy.
Let's get high and fuck. I think that is everything that I guess I wanted to share. I think that Brave New World feels more likely just because, God, 1984 sounds so miserable that it's hard to imagine people getting to the point where they would accept it and not just be constantly raging against the machine. But another thing I didn't even mention, about 85% of the population lives kind of outside of the major cities and sort of slum areas, but they kind of live a sane, normal life, like a life that's not that different from ours, or like modern India, something like that. Like bad areas, but like they live.
Right.
But the thought police
So
are out there.
A lot of commerce isn't super technologically advanced. Like there's like more like farmers markets than grocery stores, but
yeah, those do happen sort of outside of major cities. There is like a population that lives out there, and the thought police kind of live secretly among them to make sure that they don't start trying to foment a rebellion or anything like that. But for the most part, they're just left to do their own thing outside of cities.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's the Revolutionary War happened because there was a group of people who felt that the government had become tyrannical enough that they're like, all right, let's talk in secret until we got a plan, and we're going to go do our own thing.
We're referring to real world, like American Revolutionary War?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And it seems to me like there's always those pockets. There's always pockets of groups that are whispering under the surface. So it's like, man, I don't know how you transition from a world that's like right now, like we have, relatively speaking, we have free speech. Like our media, our communication channels are manipulated a little bit, but really we're gonna say whatever the fuck we want right now.
For sure.
And most of the web is dark, so people are saying whatever they want to say to each other. How do you go from that, where all those people are already organized in these groups, to getting everybody to shut up and not organize at all? That's a hell of a transition to try to manage.
Right.
We'll see, man.
It would have to happen in the case of an emergency. Like all the communication channels get shut down because there are rampant spies in the country, and we're at war with this other country, and for safety, we need to shut down communication for the sake of getting rid of spies.
Right.
Or something like that. Probably.
There has to be global crises.
There just has to be a crisis. Yeah.
Thank God there's no international groups organizing global crises. Right. That's when things would really get bad.
Then I'd be scared. I'd be worried.
Night school.